In April of 1841, Silas Rutledge delivered an announcement so shocking that even the most ruthless plantation lords of South Carolina recoiled in disbelief. He declared that his daughter, Catherine, a 28-year-old woman whose frame exceeded 260 pounds, would be placed entirely under the authority of an enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross. Not as a caretaker, not as a servant, but as her master in every sense except on parchment. The white society of Colleton County gasped in scandal, but none of them understood what Rutledge was truly unleashing, or what Ezekiel Cross would ultimately do to Catherine in the months that followed. By November, her body had transformed in ways no physician could explain. 13 men lay dead, and Cypress Grove Plantation was reduced to smoldering ash. What had really transpired between that enslaved man and the plantation owner's daughter? What unspeakable act did he inflict upon her that left even the most hardened witnesses trembling? Before we strip away the final veil of this story, subscribe, strike that bell, and comment the state you're watching from. Now let me drag you back to where it all began. Spring in Colleton County did not arrive gently. It descended with a crushing heat and humidity so thick it made the very air feel solid. The Combe River crawled sluggishly through the low country, its black surface reflecting strands of Spanish moss that draped from live oaks like mourning shrouds. Rice paddies sprawled endlessly, their drowned fields worked by hundreds of enslaved men and women who slogged waist-deep from dawn until dusk. This was an empire of agony. Wealth distilled from torment, prosperity carved from human misery, all of it justified by men who told themselves that cruelty was simply the order of creation. Cypress Grove Plantation stretched across 800 acres of middlingly fertile soil. Its master, Silas Rutledge, lingered on the margins of the county elite, desperate for the power he could never quite grasp. His estate held 58 enslaved people, enough to mark him as wealthy in common eyes, yet only a middling figure compared to dynasties who ruled over thousands of acres and hundreds of souls. The true lords of Colleton County summered in Charleston, sent their sons to northern universities, and bore names heavy enough to topple reputations with a single syllable. Silas had wed Elizabeth Yancey in 1812, a match that brought him modest acreage and a respected surname. Elizabeth was a pragmatic woman, meticulous in her ledgers, more concerned with profits than with pomp. She died in 1813, delivering their only child, a daughter christened Catherine. For 28 years, Silas raised her alone, pouring the rest of his energy into clawing his way toward the inner sanctum of county power. He was a tall figure, gaunt in the way of men who forget food when consumed by obsession. His hair had grayed too early, giving him a severe mask that mirrored his icy temperament. In trade, he was known as calculating, relentless, but upright enough, a man who pressed merciless bargains, yet always kept his word. Catherine, however, grew in shadows. Tutored at home, cut off from society, she belonged nowhere. By 1841, she was 28, her body swollen to nearly 260 pounds after years of poisons disguised as medicine, prescriptions from doctors who labeled her hysterical, nervous, unstable. She was prone to violent storms, screaming fits that ended in shattered objects. Just a year earlier, she had slashed her father's hand with a letter opener, leaving him scarred for life. In hushed circles, white society cloaked their gossip in false pity. Poor Silas Rutledge, they said, cursed with a mad daughter. Such a tragedy. She had been such a lovely child. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew what Catherine had seen when she Weomu as 12. None of them understood that her madness was not madness at all, but the sane reaction of a soul forced to dwell among monsters. On April 7th, a letter arrived carried by private courier. Silas slit it open in his study, expecting mundane correspondence. Instead, he found 3 pages of fine paper, sealed in red wax, stamped with a sigil he knew instantly. A scythe crossed with wheat stalks, the crest of the Brethren of the Harvest. 13 men who gathered in secrecy, performing rituals they swore fattened the land through blood sacrifice. Their rites fused fragments of old European superstition with stolen fragments of enslaved cosmologies. They believed the strong were destined to consume the weak, sometimes metaphorically, sometimes with teeth and blood. Silas himself had joined them in 1822. Over 19 years he had attended perhaps 40 gatherings, rites that slid from unsettling into monstrous. Now, the letter made clear, his debts had come due. $12,000, borrowed in drips and drops across years of wages and failed ventures. A ruinous sum. Repayment meant selling nearly all his land, every enslaved body he owned, the collapse of everything he had built. But the letter held an alternative. Members in peril were allowed to prove their devotion in darker ways. Silas would take his daughter, Catherine, and surrender her wholly to one of his enslaved men, not as punishment, not as theatre, as a true transfer of dominion lasting a full year. That man would possess absolute control, her body, her labor, her days, her nights. And Silas would announce it publicly, before the brethren, as proof of his loyalty. The county's most powerful families were told it was nothing more than a radical medical intervention for his daughter's supposed illness, yet the humiliation would be total. In a culture that claimed white women were sacred, treasured, shielded above all else, Silas would be announcing that his daughter was worth less than the bodies he bought and sold. But if he obeyed, the debt would vanish, and the brethren promised to flood him with resources to restore his standing. That night, Silas lingered in his study for hours, trapped in the silence of his own thoughts. He weighed his choices. Bankruptcy meant ruin, complete annihilation. The brethren's roots ran through every judge, every attorney, every politician in the county. If he defied them, they could erase him as though he had never lived. Or he could sacrifice his daughter's dignity to preserve his own fragile grasp on status. It was the choice society had trained him to make, property above flesh, power above morality. By candlelight, his hand shaking, he scrawled his acceptance and dispatched it before the dawn broke. 3 days later, another letter arrived. It carried a name and a fragment of history. Ezekiel Cross, age 33. Recently purchased through intermediaries from a Virginia plantation, skilled in carpentry, practiced in herbal medicine. His temperament marked down as silent, compliant, obedient. But what the letter did not reveal was the truth. Ezekiel Cross had been chosen for this task deliberately. His arrival at Cypress Grove was no accident. He carried within him a fire for justice and the patience to wait until the hour was right. On April 13th, a wagon rattled up the long drive of Cypress Grove, driven by a trader named Henderson. Strangely, the wagon pulled to the very steps of the main house rather than to the barns where such business usually unfolded. Silas stepped out onto the porch, shading his eyes from the hard morning light. In the bed of the wagon sat Ezekiel. The first thing Silas noticed were his eyes. Most enslaved men lowered their gaze out of instinct for survival, but Ezekiel met Silas's stare directly, calm, calculating, unflinching. It unsettled Silas to his core. Ezekiel was tall, easily 6'2", with wide shoulders and lean muscle shaped by years of relentless labor. His skin bore no lash, scars. His clothing was plain yet clean. His hands were rough and calloused, but his fingers moved with the precision of a craftsman rather than the clumsiness of brute force. Henderson climbed down, handed over the documents. Ezekiel Cross, as requested, his last owner described him as quiet, dependable. Your associates want you to know this man was chosen with care. Silas barely skimmed the papers before fixing his gaze on Ezekiel. You understand why you are here? He asked. Yes, sir. Ezekiel's voice was low, measured, tinged with the cadence of Virginia. My daughter is unwell, Silas continued. You will be responsible for her care. The doctors have failed. They say you know something of herbal cures. My grandmother was a healer, sir, Ezekiel replied steadily. She taught me before I was sold. The transaction ended swiftly. Ezekiel was assigned to a small cabin near the main house, apart from the quarters of the other enslaved. He was given sparse supplies and told his duties would begin at sunrise. His orders were clear. Catherine's care was his only task, and failure would bring consequences beyond imagining. Ezekiel bowed his head and said, Yes, sir, when expected. Then they left him alone. For the first time since his arrival, Ezekiel allowed his face to change. His jaw loosened, his shoulders eased. He sat on the narrow bed and pulled from beneath his shirt a cloth bundle. Unwrapping it carefully, he revealed a fragile scrap of paper, creased and faded, bearing 3 names written in a child's uncertain hand. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, his wife, his son, his daughter, sold away 3 years earlier to a brutal Alabama plantation notorious for grinding souls into the dirt. Within 18 months, all 3 were gone. Sarah, taken by a fever, left untreated. Benjamin, a boy lost to infection after an accident. And little Ruth, 6 years old, who had simply stopped eating, starved by grief, unable to understand why her family had been torn from her arms. And the man responsible was Silas Rutledge, not out of necessity, not out of punishment, but as a demonstration to prove to the brethren that he was capable of cruelty without sentiment, that he could shatter a family like dry sticks tossed to a fire. Ezekiel had spent the next 2 years moving southward, deliberately selling himself from one plantation to the next, always watching, always listening. He learned the names of the brethren whispered in secret. He studied their rituals, their arrogance, their belief that they stood beyond judgment, and he carried his knowledge like a blade, waiting, sharpening, preparing for the moment when he could finally strike. When the chance finally came to be sold directly to Rutledge, Ezekiel recognized it as the opening he had been waiting for. This was his path into the master's house, into his hidden chambers, into the softest places of his life, where secrets and vulnerabilities lived. Justice did not always descend from courts or statutes. Sometimes it was born from patience, from design, from the willingness to become as monstrous as the monsters themselves. He folded the worn scrap with the 3 names, pressed it to his chest once, then tucked it away. Stretching back on the narrow bed, he fixed his eyes on the ceiling and began shaping the plan that would decide what came next. His first morning came on April the 14th. A house slave named Judith, grey streaks in her hair and weariness in her voice, led him to Catherine's room on the 2nd floor. Her knock was hesitant. "Miss Catherine, your father has brought someone new to assist with your treatments." A crash answered, wood striking wall, glass shattering. Then a voice, blurred with slur but sharp with venom. "I do not want more treatments. Send him away." Judith's eyes slid toward Ezekiel, heavy with sympathy. "She has bad days. Today is one." Ezekiel placed his hand on the door, opened it, and stepped through, closing it firmly behind him before Judith could enter. The room was large, but cloaked in shadow. The truth is a blade when laid bare. Thick curtains sealed out the light. The air hung heavy, stale, with the odor of unwashed sheets, and beneath it, a sickly sweetness. The reek of mercury. Books littered the floor in careless heaps. A picture frame lay smashed against the wall. Clothing was strewn everywhere. Catherine sat slumped in a chair before the dead fireplace, swathed in a soiled dressing gown. Her hair fell in dark, tangled ropes across her face. Her skin was swollen, her eyes clouded, her hands trembling against the chair's arms as if they could not be still. She looked at Ezekiel, confusion in her gaze, then fear, then fury. "Who are you?" I said. "No more doctors." "I am no doctor, miss," Ezekiel answered evenly. "My name is Ezekiel. Your father asked me to help you." "Help?" She barked a jagged laugh. "That is the word they all use. Help, treatment, medicine. They mean poison. They mean chains. They mean silence." She rose suddenly, swaying on weak legs. "I know what this is. He is punishing me again, for remembering, for speaking, for refusing to forget." Ezekiel remained still, non-threatening, his voice low. "What are you supposed to forget?" The question pierced her rage. For a heartbeat she faltered, her anger thinning into raw fragility. "You don't know?" "I know nothing, miss," he said softly. "Only that your father believes you are unwell." Catherine studied him closely now, as if truly seeing him for the first time. "You are not from here." "Virginia, originally, miss." "Do you know what happens in this house? What they do in the cellar?" Ezekiel's pulse surged, but his face betrayed nothing. "I do not know what you mean." "Liar." The word carried no venom, only exhaustion. Everyone lies. It is easier than truth. She collapsed back into her chair. Leave me. Tell my father his newest torment has failed. But Ezekiel did not leave. He crossed to the window and drew the curtains wide. Light exploded into the chamber. Catherine shrieked, covering her face. When did you last go outside, miss? I cannot walk so far. I am too weak. When did you last eat without medicine in your veins? The medicine is necessary. Doctors insist. What if the doctors are wrong? Her hands dropped slowly from her eyes. She stared at him now, terror and hope colliding in her gaze like a soul balanced on the edge of a blade. What did you say? Ezekiel turned from the window. This was the moment. The first card played, the hinge of everything to come. I said, what if the doctors are wrong? What if every lesson, every verdict about your condition was designed not to cure you, but to keep you docile? What if your father has been dosing you for years, so you never recover enough to tell what you saw? Absolute silence. Catherine's eyes widened, and her trembling hands stilled as though some invisible command had snapped them rigid. For 30 seconds she simply sat, thinking, the wheels of memory grinding behind her lashes. When she spoke again, the voice that came was altered, clearer, colder. He told you. Your father told me nothing, miss, Ezekiel said, but I have watched. I know Mercury when I see it. I know the slow ruin left by laudanum. Women do not arrive at this state by accident. They are worked upon, made small, made forgetful, made useful to men who fear what they might otherwise say. Why say it? Suspicion bled back into her tone like a returning tide. This is a test, a trap. I say it because I can make you well, truly well, clear-headed, strong enough to leave this room and speak without trembling. But it will not be gentle. Your body has been nourished on those medicines for years. To wean will hurt. For a time you will feel worse before you grow better. Your father will not consent. Why would you do such a thin beat? She demanded, voice pitched between scorn and hunger. Ezekiel met her gaze without flinch. Because I have reasons to see Silas Rutledge brought low. The most certain way is this. Return to him a daughter who remembers, who speaks. Catherine, broken and sharpened both, smelled the shape of a bargain. She was not stupid. She was damaged in manners that taught brutality how to hide. You want revenge on my father? She asked, small and fierce. Yes, miss. What did he do to you? He sold my wife and children, Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, Ezekiel said, each name a wound. He sent them to an Alabama plantation that worked people to death, to prove to men who count worth by cruelty. The names landed in her like stones. She took them in, then nodded slowly. For the brethren, he sold them for the brethren. Her voice held no surprise, only the dull acceptance of one who had seen the engine under the hood. You do not know the brethren, Ezekiel started. She laughed then, a sharp edge of something unspooled. You will learn. Everyone learns. She leaned forward, intensity like a blade. If I agree, if I let you help me, then what? You get well, miss. Then we choose the next step. I will arrange my vengeance. You will arrange yours. Perhaps they will meet. Catherine stared at him as if weighing the grain of salt in his claim. Finally, she spoke with a simplicity that made the room colder. I want them all dead. My father, Judge Pelham, Reverend Crenshaw, every man who ever stood in that cellar. I want them to suffer first, to know it is coming, to beg, then to die. The venom shocked, not because it was extravagant, but because it came from someone branded mad and harmless. This was not delirium. It was rage condensed into reason by years of oppression. Ezekiel inclined his head in a slow acknowledgement. Then we have an understanding, Miss Catherine. If we are conspirators, she said, do not use my name where ears might hear. We must move carefully, he agreed. Then know this, Ezekiel. Her eyes glittered with a dangerous leg. I have killed before. She spoke the confession plainly. 3 house slaves who could have told her father of her lucid moments, gone. I cannot recall exactly how. The laudanum blurs everything, but I remember doing it. Silence fell heavy between them, the conspiracy now salted with the taste of blood. Their pact had teeth, and the first act, whatever its shape, was already stained with absence. Told they ran away. She smiled terribly. So if you plan to betray me, to use me, then dispose of me, know that I am not a victim. I am something worse. Ice ran down Ezekiel's spine. He had expected an ally, not someone whose capacity for violence might exceed his own, but he kept steady. I believe you, miss, and I will not betray you. Good. Catherine stood more steadily. Then let us begin. But I have one condition. When this is over, when we have had our revenge, I want to die. I do not want to live with what I have seen and done. You will help me with that too. Agreed. Ezekiel had not expected that, but he was committed now. Agreed. Then we have a deal. Catherine extended her hand. After hesitation, Ezekiel shook it. Her grip was stronger than expected. Over the following week, Ezekiel began Catherine's treatment. He gradually reduced her laudanum, replacing some with herbal tinctures, valerian root for anxiety and sleep, chamomile for digestive distress, milk thistle to help her liver process accumulated toxins. The process was brutal. Catherine spent 3 days in bed with fever, shaking and vomiting. Ezekiel stayed with her through it, holding a basin while she was sick, wiping her face with cool cloths, speaking quietly just to remind her she was not alone. When the worst passed, she was weak but clearer than she had been in years. The constant tremor decreased. Her speech was less slurred. She could focus on reading. Then, real work began. Ezekiel had her walking short distances at first from her room to the hallway end and back. It exhausted her, but he insisted every day a little further. He adjusted her diet, bringing lean meats and vegetables instead of heavy pastries. He limited portions strictly, though she fought him years of using food as comfort, making restriction difficult. While working on her physical recovery, they talked. Catherine told him about the cellar, about what she saw at 12. She described it in detail that made Ezekiel's stomach turn, but he listened without interruption. She told him about years of gaslighting that followed. Her father convincing everyone, including herself, that she was mad, that she invented memories, that nothing she said could be trusted. She told him about the journal she kept hidden, pages documenting dates and times when her father left late at night, names of visitors at strange hours, sounds from below that should not be possible. Ezekiel told her about his family, about Sarah, who sang while working and taught their children to read, despite the danger. About Benjamin, who at 8 could do mathematics that amazed overseers. About Ruth, who loved flowers and picked wild blooms to make their cabin beautiful. He told her how Silas came to the Virginia plantation with a buyer's warrant, how he inspected them like livestock, how he agreed to purchase all 3 for reasonable price, then changed terms at the last moment, saying he only needed the woman and children, not Ezekiel, how he deliberately split the family for no practical reason, but simply because he could. He smiled when he did it. Ezekiel said quietly, "That is what I remember most. My son crying, holding my leg, begging, my wife trying to be strong, telling Benjamin to be brave, and your father smiled like it pleased him to cause that pain." Catherine listened with newly clear eyes. "I am sorry. I know sorry is just a word, but I am sorry you suffered because of what my father is. You are not responsible for what he does, miss. No, but I am responsible for woe that I do next. And I promise you, Ezekiel, he will pay for what he took from you. They will all pay." The formal announcement was scheduled for April 29th. 41 people gathered in the Cypress Grove dining room for what invitations described as an important family announcement. The county's elite arrived in carriages, Judge Pelham with his wife Eleanor, Reverend Crenshaw with his daughter, Marcus Fanning and his family, Benjamin Lyle from the bank. The meal. The spread had been lavish. Oysters, roast duck, several rice preparations, candied yams, warm loaves, and a towering cake for dessert. Through it all, Catherine remained at her father's right, eating sparingly, replying only when addressed, volunteering nothing. Ezekiel worked among the other household servants, moving without notice, topping off glasses, removing plates. To most guests, he was invisible, yet he absorbed every phrase, watched every gesture, and stored each detail away. After dessert, Silas rose and tapped his glass. "Friends, thank you for coming. As you know, Catherine has suffered for years. We tried every remedy. Physicians from Charleston, a specialist from Philadelphia. Nothing worked until lately." He motioned toward Ezekiel. "2 weeks ago, I brought Ezekiel here. He understands herbal practice. As you can see, Catherine is much better, clearer, calmer, more like herself than she has been in years." Low murmurs rippled around the table. Catherine kept her face neutral, though Ezekiel noticed her fingers clenched the napkin beneath the table. "This improvement," Silas went on, "forces a hard choice. Catherine needs a level of care our household cannot sustain. After long thought, I have decided Ezekiel will take full responsibility for my daughter's welfare. He will have absolute authority over her treatment, daily life, and lodgings, effective immediately." The conversation shifted. Confusion surfaced. Said. Guests exchanged looks. Mrs. Pelam's countenance registered shock. Marcus Fanning spoke. "Silas, I don't follow. You mean to put your daughter permanently under a slave's charge? I place her with the one who succeeded where others failed. My daughter's health outweighs social propriety." "Surely," Reverend Crenshaw interposed gently. "There are other choices. A companion, a nurse, someone more suitable." Silas's jaw set. "My decision stands. Catherine agrees. Do you not, daughter?" All eyes sought Catherine. This was the instant she could refuse, could reveal everything, could tear it all down. Instead, she offered a small, controlled smile that disclosed nothing. "I trust my father's judgment. Ezekiel has been gentle and his remedies work. I approve this arrangement." Flawless delivery. But Ezekiel perceived what others missed, the whiteness of her knuckles on the napkin, the flash of rage in her eyes, a silent vow of violence. She performed the obedient daughter. Inwardly she screamed. The evening dragged through strained conversation. Some left early, others lingered to speak privately with Silas, asking questions they would not voice publicly. Ezekiel overheard fragments. "Are you sure this is wise? What will people say?" "The brethren won't accept this if it goes public," Judge Pelam muttered near the study. Silas's reply was too low to catch, yet it drew Pelam's nod and a clasped shoulder. By midnight, the last guest had gone. Catherine withdrew to her chamber, Silas to his study. Ezekiel cleared the remaining dishes, then climbed the stairs. He rapped lightly at Catherine's door. "Enter." She sat by the window in her dinner gown, staring out over the darkened grounds, refusing to turn. "So it is done. I am officially your charge." "Property of property," she said, voice dry. "How absurd. How are you feeling, miss?" "I want to set this house ablaze with everyone inside." "But we must wait. Isn't that what you tell me?" "Yes, miss. I agreed because I want them to feel safe. I want them to believe this is only my father's oddity. I want them to forget about me while we work." She turned and fixed her gaze on him. "Did you see their faces? The disgust, the pity. They think I am pathetic. They have no idea what we are planning." "And what exactly are we planning, miss?" Catherine crossed to her dresser and drew out a wooden box. Inside lay papers dense with her handwriting. "I have been recording everything I remember for years. Dates, names, rituals described in code so it reads as nonsense if discovered. But I can decode it. We have enough to ruin 20 men. And will anyone believe us, miss? A woman just emerged from madness and an enslaved man? No, which is why we need proof. Evidence they cannot dismiss. Real, physical evidence." She withdrew a single page. "I know where they keep their records. The Brethren maintains a ledger of all activities, every ritual, every sacrifice, every member's part. It ensures all are equally guilty. My father mentioned it long ago before realizing I would remember." "Where is this ledger?" "In the cellar. There is a hidden room beyond the main chamber. I never saw within, but I heard them speak of it. That is where they keep what they cannot afford to lose." Ezekiel felt excitement tangled with dread. Such a ledger could destroy them, but reaching it meant stepping into the heart of the Brethren's domain. We would need to go when the house is silent. My father travels to Charleston monthly for business. The next trip is May 14th. He will be gone 3 days. That gives us 2 weeks to prepare. We need the cellar's layout, every room, every hiding place. I can help. I've been planning for 16 years. I know exactly what must be done. They spent an hour mapping details in whispers. Catherine sketched the cellar from memory. Ezekiel asked about guards, keys, slave schedules. When he left her chamber, it was nearly 2 in the morning. He walked to his small room, thoughts racing. He was committed now to conspiracy with a woman brilliant, wounded, and frightening. He unfolded the paper with his family's names, studying it by candlelight. I am doing this for you, for Sarah, for Benjamin, for Ruth, for every soul who suffered because men like Silas Rutledge believe power entitles them to destroy lives. He snuffed the candle and lay in darkness, listening to the house settle. Somewhere below, in a cellar he had never entered, lay secrets that could shatter South Carolina's most powerful families. In 2 weeks, he would descend to find them. The 2 weeks passed with deceptive calm. Catherine kept improving. Her weight dropped, her mind stayed keen. She walked farther each day. More vital still, she translated portions of her coded journals for Ezekiel, revealing details of the Brethren that chilled his blood. The Brethren was not confined to Colleton County. It belonged to a greater network across the South, linked circles in Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Richmond, different names, but always the same structure. Wealthy men, convinced their power sprang from ancient practices of dominance and sacrifice, believing themselves heirs to traditions thousands of years old. Catherine explained one afternoon. European mystery cults mixed with knowledge taken from enslaved people, twisted into something monstrous, justifications for deeds with no justification, and the offerings were not always animals. Sometimes, she said, they took people who would not be missed, slaves without family, poor whites who wandered onto their grounds. Once I heard my father speak of a child, though I never knew if it was literal. Where do the bodies go? Swamps on every plantation. Bodies sink in and are never found. Alligators finish the rest. And this ledger records all of it. Every ritual across 40 years. Names, dates, descriptions. They keep it because they require mutual complicity. Everyone equally guilty, so no one can expose the others without destroying himself. May 14th came. Silas left for Charleston at first light, taking his carriage and manservant. He would stay with associates, handle business, return evening of May 16th. That gave them nearly 3 full days. They waited until night fell before moving. The house slid into its evening rhythm. By 10, the main rooms were silent. They gathered in Catherine's chamber. She had changed into plain dark clothing for freedom of movement, hair drawn back tight. She looked like a woman going to war. "Are you certain, miss?" "I have never been more certain. Let us go." The cellar door lay in the kitchen behind the pantry. It resembled wall paneling, but when pressed on the right it clicked and opened to narrow stairs plunging into darkness. The smell struck instantly. Damp earth, old smoke, something organic and rotten. Catherine saw his reaction. "You get used to it. I wish I could say you stop smelling it, but I would be lying." They descended with care, Ezekiel carrying a shuttered lantern casting faint light. The steps were steep and worn, wood creaking. After 20 treads, they reached the bottom. The cellar spread larger than expected, roughly 30 feet square, low ceiling braced by thick beams, floor of packed earth, walls of stone, sweating moisture. At the center stood what Catherine called the altar, now only a heavy wooden table, but dark stains on its surface and grooves cut into the edges spoke their own story. Around the room stood candle holders, clay jars sealed with wax, wooden boxes, a rack of black robes edged in crimson. Along one wall, shelves held books and papers. Catherine moved like one following a memorized path. She led Ezekiel to the far wall where stones appeared solid. She pressed one stone and a click sounded. A section swung inward, revealing another chamber. This room smaller, 10 feet square, and here the Brethren hid their secrets. The ledger rested on a wooden stand in the center, massive, 2 feet tall, 18 in tow, chest-wide, bound in dark leather with metal clasps. Beside it lay smaller journals. Around the walls, shelves held jars. Ezekiel refused to examine too closely. "There," Catherine whispered, pointing. "That is what we need." Ezekiel stepped to the stand and opened the book gently. The pages were thick parchment filled with meticulous script, names and dates reaching back to 1800, rituals written with clinical precision like scientific experiments rather than atrocities. He read, and with each entry his horror deepened. These men had not committed random violence. They had built a system. Regular meetings every 6 weeks timed to agricultural cycles, believing blood-nourished soil. They had killed at least 37 people, likely more, mostly enslaved, but also poor whites, indigenous, anyone vulnerable, and notes of consumption. They had not only killed, they had eaten. Pieces prepared in certain ways, consumed at ritual meals believed to transfer power. "Dear God," Ezekiel whispered, "this is worse than I imagined." "I tried to tell you." Catherine's voice was flat. "I watched them when I was 12. I watched them cut pieces from that woman on the altar. I saw my father lift a goblet and drink. Then I spent 16 years being told I was delusional, that everything had been imagined. But I knew. I had always known." Ezekiel turned page after page, searching for references to his family. He found them under October 1838. 3 short lines: acquired family unit from Virginia. Woman Sarah, children Benjamin and Ruth, male separated to display resolve, sent to Alabama contact, payment confirmed, 3 lines. That was all the destruction of his family warranted. "We must take this," Ezekiel said, voice trembling with rage. "No," Catherine's hand gripped his arm. "If we take it now, they will realize at once. We must copy the most vital entries first." She was right. Yet Ezekiel wanted to burn it all, but vengeance required patience, demanded being more cunning than the enemy. They labored for 3 hours. Catherine had brought ink and paper. She transcribed passages about specific rituals, focusing on those naming active members. Ezekiel documented the victims, compiling a list of names and dates that could be cross-checked with outside records. It was exhausting work made heavier by the content. More than once Ezekiel had to pause, hands shaking uncontrollably. Once Catherine left the chamber completely, overwhelmed by memories, but steadily, deliberately, they built their case. Page upon page of evidence. They were so intent, neither heard footsteps on the cellar stairs. The first sign something was wrong came when light burst in the outer chamber, lantern glow far stronger than their single lamp. Ezekiel looked up abruptly, blood turning cold. Silas Rutledge stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 men. Behind them, at least 4 more figures filled the main cellar. "I must confess," Silas said with composure. "I am impressed. I did not expect you to uncover the inner chamber." Catherine rose slowly, placing herself between Ezekiel and her father. "You were meant to be in Charleston. I was meant to be, but I never trusted your miraculous recovery. So I made arrangements. I departed this morning, yes, but I returned this afternoon and watched the house through the evening, waiting to see what you would attempt." He stepped into the chamber, the 2 men sealing the exit. "Did you truly believe I would not foresee this? That I would not plan for the chance you might remember, might seek revenge? You have been poisoning me for 16 years. Catherine's voice stayed steady despite all of it. "And you expect me to simply endure that? I expect you to comprehend it was necessary. You saw what no child should see. You could not grasp it. I could not allow you to destroy everything. I was 12, and I saw you kill a woman and eat her flesh. That was as not fear, Father. That was a rational response to witnessing evil." "Evil? Such an easy word." Silas moved further inside, eyes shifting between Catherine and Ezekiel. "And you, using my daughter to reach me, filling her mind with schemes of vengeance." Ezekiel said nothing, measuring distances and odds, 7 men against 1, with Catherine unable to fight. The situation appeared hopeless. Silas seemed to read his thoughts. "Do nothing reckless. I do not wish to harm either of you. Not permanently, but I cannot permit this rebellion to persist." He signaled to the men behind him. "Take them upstairs. We must decide what happens next." They were dragged to Silas's study and locked inside together. The room was windowless, save for 1 high transom, unreachable. The door was heavy oak, bolted from outside. As soon as they were alone, Catherine stepped toward Ezekiel. "Are you hurt?" No, miss, but we are in grave danger. Yes, but not as much as you suppose. She slipped something from beneath her dress. The papers they had been transcribing. I managed to keep these. He did not search me. Too confident. That will not matter if we are dead. We are not going to die. Not tonight. Catherine's eyes calculated. My father will prefer to resolve this without killing me if he can. I remain his daughter, his blood. That gives us leverage. Over the next hour, voices arrived in the hall as men gathered, the brethren assembled. At last, the door opened and Marcus Fanning stood there, face severe. They are ready for you. Come quietly, and you will not be harmed. They were led down to the cellar once more. Now the main chamber had been altered, all 13 brethren present in ritual robes, candles blazing in every sconce. The altar was swathed in crimson cloth. 13 chairs formed a perfect ring, filled except for Silas's seat at the head. Ezekiel and Catherine stood at the circle's center, compelled to face Silas. The others watched with looks ranging from detached curiosity to outright hostility. Silas threw back his hood. Brothers of the harvest, thank you for coming on short notice. We face a crisis. My daughter and her companion discovered our inner chamber. They found the ledger. They were copying entries when I found them. Judge Pelham spoke without delay. Then they must be removed permanently. This is straightforward. I disagree, Silas interrupted, raising a hand. My daughter is kin. I cannot simply dispose of her without exhausting other possibilities. And the man offers an opportunity. What opportunity? Reverend Crenshaw asked. To test a theory I have long held, that a person can be drawn into our work through their own acts if presented correctly. Silas turned to Ezekiel. You seek vengeance against me. You wish to destroy me for what I did to your family. I comprehend that. But suppose I offer another kind of revenge, one more effective. I do not follow, Ezekiel said cautiously. I offer you membership, not as an equal. The brethren does not receive men of color as full brothers, but as associates. You would attend our gatherings, take part in rituals, and in return I would grant you what you desire most. My family is dead. You cannot restore them. No, but I can deliver vengeance on those who slew them. The plantation owner in Alabama who worked your wife and children to death. His name is Edward Gaines. He is not of us. He lacks our protection. If you join, prove your loyalty, and I will give you the means to destroy him. Money, intelligence, whatever you need to make him pay. The offer hung obscene and precise. Join the men who destroyed your family to avenge them by destroying another monster. And if I refuse, Ezekiel's voice was low, then you and Catherine die tonight. Your bodies go to the swamp. No one will ever learn what transpired. The papers Catherine copied will be consumed. Her journals obliterated. Everything will continue as it always has. Silas spread his hands. But if you accept, you live. Catherine lives. You get your revenge. All it will cost is your soul. Ezekiel glanced at Catherine. Her face was pale, but she gave him the smallest shake of her head. Do not do it. Whatever comes, do not become them. Yet Ezekiel found himself weighing the offer. Penetrate their ranks, gather more proof, buy time. He looked back at Silas and then at Catherine. What becomes of her? She returns to her chamber, resumes her medicines, forgets all she has seen. The alternative is she dies with you. No. Catherine's voice cut through the room. I will not forget again. I will not be silenced. Kill me if you must, Father, but I will not pretend I do not know what you are. Silas's face tightened. Then you have made your choice. Wait, Ezekiel interposed quickly. I accept. But on one term. Catherine goes free. Not back to her room. Free. Let her leave this house. Let her leave South Carolina. Provide funds so she can begin anew. If you do that, I will join you. Several brethren murmured disagreement, though Judge Pelham spoke up. The boy has a point. The girl is already broken. Even if she spoke, who would credit her? But a man willing to join us despite his loathing, that is valuable. It proves our reach. Silas pondered, then nodded. Very well. Catherine will be sent north. I have contacts in Philadelphia who will take her in. She will receive a new identity and a stipend, but she may never return to South Carolina or contact anyone from her past. She will be dead to this place. Agreed. Catherine stared at Ezekiel. No, I will not leave you to... Agreed, Ezekiel cut in. She goes free. I join you. Then we have our bargain. Silas faced the others. Catherine leaves tomorrow. Ezekiel's initiation will occur in 3 weeks at the next regular assembly. Until then, he remains at Cypress Grove under guard. Attempt escape or contact and the pact is void. Both perish. Understood? Ezekiel nodded. Catherine looked as if she might protest, but Ezekiel caught her eye and gave a slight shake. Trust me. At dawn the following morning, a closed carriage took Catherine away. Ezekiel watched it from his cabin window as it rolled down the long drive and vanished into the trees. She had not been allowed to say farewell. He had not been permitted to speak with her after the cellar confrontation. Yet, as attendants escorted her from the house the night before, she had glanced back once. And in that look, he found something like hope. She understood. She knew he had not truly surrendered, that this was tactic, not capitulation. Whether she would go to Philadelphia or pursue her own course remained unknown. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Ezekiel's life. He lived under constant surveillance. 2 overseers shadowed him constantly. He could not leave the plantation. He was given trivial chores to occupy him, pointless tasks that only ate time. But he was also granted access to the main house, to the study where Silas kept papers, to the cellar where the next meeting would take place. They were watching. They watched him, yes, but they were also testing him, looking for any attempt at escape, any spark of sabotage. Ezekiel gave them neither. He played the part of the defeated man who had made the pragmatic choice to survive, quiet, obedient, asking nothing, causing no trouble. Yet his eyes catalogued everything, the rhythms of the house, who could be trusted among the enslaved, which overseers delighted in cruelty, which brethren figures came through with regularity. He assembled a mental map of how the place worked, hunting for fishers. At night, alone in his cabin, he rehearsed what was coming. His initiation would demand participation in their rituals. They would press him, force him into complicity with horrors, so that any exposure would be ruin. He weighed how far he could bend, which lines he would refuse to cross even for revenge, whether there existed an act so monstrous that justice could not excuse it. He had no satisfying answers. On June 2nd, the night before the initiation, Silas came to his door. It was late, well past midnight. Ezekiel woke to the knocking, opened the cabin, and found his owner standing alone on the threshold. "May I come in?" Silas asked. Ezekiel stepped back. Silas stepped inside, took in the spare room, then spoke. "Tomorrow you become one of us. Not whole, never holy, but enough. I want you to understand what that means. I know what I agreed to. Do you? Do you truly?" Silas seated himself on the single chair without permission. "The Brethren has existed 43 years. In that time we have never lost a member to exposure. No one has broken our code. Do you know why? Because everyone is guilty, but also because we look after each other. A man joins the Brethren and doors open. Business opportunities appear. Legal problems vanish. Enemies find themselves suddenly in trouble. We are not merely a society, Ezekiel. We are a network of power that runs across the South. Once you are part of it, even as an associate, you will have access to resources you cannot imagine. And in return," he did not pause, "I help you remove obstacles." Silas did not flinch. "In exchange, you help us maintain the natural order, the strong over the weak, the powerful over the powerless. That is how the world has always worked. We name it and we use it. You killed my family to show your commitment to that order. I did what needed doing, and I would do it again. Sentiment is weakness. Love is weakness. The moment you prize individuals above power, you have already lost." He leaned forward until his face filled the dim room. "But understand this. Your family is dead. Nothing you do will bring them back. Yet, you can make their deaths mean something. With the Brethren's reach, you can prevent other families from suffering. From inside, you can steer things, press for less brutal treatment, argue for better conditions. You will have a voice at our table that carries weight. The argument nearly sounded convincing. The idea of becoming a reformer from within, using the position to help others, shimmered as a rationalization. Ezekiel knew the shape of the trap. Once he joined their rights, he would be compromised. Once he accepted their power, he would be corrupted by it. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because I want you to succeed. Because having you as an ally is worth more than having you as an enemy. Because I killed your family, but I do not want to kill you." Silas rose. "Tomorrow night you will be asked something difficult, something that will prove whether you are committed to this path. I am telling you now, whatever you are commanded to do, do it. Do not falter, do not show weakness, for if you fail this trial, both you and Catherine will die. Yes, I know she is not truly in Philadelphia. I know she hides somewhere planning her own vengeance, but I have men watching for her. The moment she emerges, if you have not proven yourself, she will be found and slain. Do you understand?" Ice coursed through Ezekiel. Catherine lived, but danger surrounded her, and his actions tomorrow would decide whether she survived or perished. "I understand," he said softly. Silas nodded once and departed without another word. Ezekiel remained alone in the dark cabin, thinking of the impossible position in which he stood. He knew he had to take part in something monstrous tomorrow, to prove himself to monsters, to become complicit in evil or else find another way, a third path that neither Silas nor the Brethren anticipated. He drew forth the paper bearing his family's names, gazing at them in the moonlight spilling through the window. "Forgive me," he whispered, "for what I'm about to do, for what I must become. I swear, it will not be for nothing." The gathering began at midnight on June the 3rd. 2 Brethren members brought Ezekiel to the cellar, stripped him bare to the waist, and bound his hands behind his back. They led him down the stairs into a candlelit chamber where 13 robed members waited. Silas stood at the head of the altar. "Brothers of the harvest, tonight we conduct an initiation unlike any before. We bring into our circle a man who has every reason to hate us, a man who has lost everything because of what we represent. We do this to prove our power extends even to our enemies, that anyone may be brought into the fold if the price is right." He gestured. 2 Brethren members brought forward a bound and gagged figure, struggling weakly. They placed her upon the altar and Saint stepped aside. She was a young woman, enslaved, perhaps 18 or 19, trembling. "This is your test, Ezekiel," Silas said. "To join us, you must take part in our rite. You must grasp the knife and make the first cut. You must prove your thirst for revenge outweighs your moral objections to our ways. Refuse, and you die here tonight. Accept, and you become one of us, and we help you destroy the man who killed your family." The other Brethren began chanting in low, rhythmic tones, words Ezekiel could not recognize. Candles flickered, shadows danced. Silas offered the knife, long, cruel blade, handle bound in leather. "Take it. Make your choice." Ezekiel's gaze fell upon the woman on the altar. She wept, muffled screams slipping through the gag. Her eyes met his. Within them he saw every enslaved soul who had ever suffered at the Brethren's hands. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. He saw himself. He looked at the knife, then at Silas, then at the 13 watching men. This was the moment where he would either become a monster or die resisting. But there was a third way, one he had plotted for 3 weeks, requiring perfect timing and unwavering resolve. He took the knife. The Brethren nodded in approval. Silas smiled. The chanting grew louder. Ezekiel stepped toward the altar. The woman's eyes widened in terror. He raised the knife, but did not move toward her. Instead, he lunged at the nearest Brethren member. The blade flashed in candlelight and sank into the man's throat before anyone could react. Blood sprayed. The man collapsed. Ezekiel seized the fallen member's robe, tearing it away in a single motion. He hurled it over the nearest candles, plunging half the room into darkness. Chaos erupted. He moved. Through the chaos he moved like violence incarnate. Years of rage distilled into action. He seized another man, using him as a shield against a swinging blow, hurled the body into two others, tangling them, kicked a knee sharply, heard bone give way, snatched a candle holder, and smashed it into a face. The brethren were men of power, but not of combat. They were soft, privileged, accustomed to others doing violence on their behalf. Ezekiel was none of those things. He fought toward the altar where the woman lay, seized her, cut her bonds with the knife he had somehow retained. "Run!" he shouted up the stairs. "Run!" She scrambled from the altar and fled. Ezekiel turned back to face the remaining brethren, 7 still standing, blocking the way. "You have made a terrible mistake," Silas said, his voice calm amidst the carnage. "You have killed yourself and Catherine both." "Maybe," Ezekiel replied, "but I will take as many of you with me as I can." What he did not know was that above them, in the main house, Catherine had returned. She had never gone to Philadelphia. She had been hiding in the slave quarters, waiting, planning, gathering allies among cypress groves enslaved. When she heard the noise from the cellar, when she saw the young woman burst screaming from the kitchen, she knew it was time, the reckoning. For 3 weeks, Catherine had moved from plantation to plantation under cover of night, speaking to enslaved people she had known all her life. People who had seen her grow, who had suffered under her father's ownership. She told them of the brethren, of the cellar, of the rituals, and she told them tonight could end it. 23 came, men and women with nothing left to lose, who had lost children to brethren rights, who had watched friends vanish into swamps, who had endured decades of cruelty from those who deemed themselves untouchable. They came upbound, armed with farm tools, axes, scythes, hammers, carrying rage shaped over generations. When the young woman burst from the cellar, Catherine led them down. The brethren, still struggling with Ezekiel, heard nothing until it was too late. Enslaved people surged into the cellar like a storm. There was no mercy, no hesitation. These were souls told their lives were property, their suffering meaningless, their existence without value, now proving how wrong those lies had been. The brethren fought. Judge Pelam drew a pistol, but was cut down before firing. Reverend Crenshaw pleaded for mercy and found none. Marcus Fanning tried to flee up the stairs and was dragged down. Silas Rutledge, seeing all collapse, made one last desperate move. He seized Catherine, pressing a knife to her throat. "Stop, stop, or I kill her." Silence fell. Catherine looked to her father without fear. "Do it. Kill me. It changes nothing. You have already lost. I can still escape. You can still nothing." Her voice was cold. 16 years you tried to break me, to make me forget, to convince me I was mad, but you failed. I remember everything, and I am going to watch you die. She drove her elbow into his ribs with sudden, vicious force. His grip slackened. She spun free. Before Silas could recover, Ezekiel was there. They faced each other, the enslaved man and the plantation owner. All power Silas had held, all privilege and cruelty, all years believing himself untouchable, meant nothing now. "You took everything from me," Ezekiel said quietly. "My wife, my children, my life. You did it for no reason except that you could. To prove something to men who valued cruelty above humanity." "Please," Silas said. That one word, pathetic and desperate. Did my wife say please? Did my son? Did any of those you killed here tonight? Ezekiel shook his head. No mercy. Not for you. Not ever. What followed was ruthless and final. The enslaved rose and made certain none of the brethren survived. 13 men who had believed themselves beyond consequence learned in their last moments that power was an illusion, that cruelty always returned to its source. When it was done, Catherine stood at the cellar's center, surrounded by bodies. She trembled, not from fear, but from release. 16 years of rage finally freed. Ezekiel approached her. Are you hurt? No. And you? Minor cuts. Nothing serious. His gaze swept over the devastation. What do we do now? Now, Catherine's smile was grim. "Now we burn it all. The cellar, the ledger, the proof. We erase every trace of what happened here. But that evidence could prove what they did, could bring justice. Justice." Catherine laughed, bitter. Ezekiel looked around the ruin. "This is justice, the only justice we will ever have. If we take that ledger to the authorities, what happens? We are hunted, killed. Surviving brethren from other counties come for us. This ends only if the Cypress Grove chapter is believed gone in accident. No evidence, no witnesses, no story." She was right. Ezekiel knew it. Then we burn it. They spent 2 hours preparing. The enslaved who had aided them slipped away before dawn, vanishing to their plantations. They would say nothing, see nothing, know nothing. That was survival. Catherine and Ezekiel poured oil through the cellar, stacked kindling and wood, arranged bodies to mimic an accident should anyone investigate. They placed the ledger and all journals upon the altar. "Wait," Ezekiel said. He opened the ledger one last time, finding the entries about his family. He tore them carefully, folding them and tucking them inside his shirt. "For them, so they are not forgotten." Catherine nodded. She took a candle, set it to the oil-soaked wood. The blaze took instantly. Within minutes, the cellar roared with fire. They fled upstairs and out into the yard, watching Cypress Grove consumed. People would come, other plantations would see the smoke, questions would rise. Catherine and Ezekiel had a story ready. A terrible accident, a candle toppled in the cellar, the master and his guests trapped below. So tragic, so final, the truth lost forever. As dawn broke over the burning ruins, Catherine turned to Ezekiel. "What will you do now?" "Go north. Use this chaos to vanish. Maybe find others who will fight. Build a network to help those who escape." He drew the paper with his family's names. "I cannot bring them back, but I can ensure others do not share their fate. I will go north too. I will use the money I've taken from my father's accounts for years to start over." She paused. "But I will not forget. I will record everything that happened here. I will write it down so someday someone knows the truth. They will destroy those records. They will erase your testimony if you speak it aloud. Then I will hide it. I will code it. I will leave it somewhere to be discovered decades from now, when we are all gone and it can no longer harm us." She gazed at the burning house. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually, even when buried deep. They stayed until the flames consumed themselves, until Cypress Grove Plantation was reduced to ash and charred timbers, until nothing remained to prove that 13 men had gathered there to commit atrocities. Then they parted, walking in opposite directions. Catherine northward toward Charleston, and ultimately Philadelphia. Ezekiel westward toward the frontier, where enslaved people could vanish into communities that asked no questions. They never saw each other again. The official account was exactly as they had planned, a tragic accident. Silas Rutledge and 12 prominent gentlemen met at Cypress Grove to discuss business when a fire broke out. All 13 perished in the cellar, overcome by smoke before escape. A grievous loss for Colleton County. Funerals with full honors, eulogies praising their service to society. Catherine Rutledge was reported to have died in the fire too. Her father's mad daughter trapped in her room, unable to flee, a sorrowful footnote to an already tragic event. No one questioned it. No one examined it closely. The enslaved who had taken part said nothing. They had no reason to speak, every reason to stay silent. Most were sold within months to distant plantations as Cypress Grove was liquidated. They scattered across South Carolina and beyond, carrying their secret to the grave. Years passed. The ruins of Cypress Grove were torn down, the land sold, new structures built. Life moved on, as it always does, covering the past with the present. Yet whispers endured. Stories told in slave quarters late at night about the plantation where the masters burned, about the night justice came for men who believed themselves untouchable, about the woman and the man who made it happen. The stories changed with each telling, becoming legend, becoming myth. But the truth remained. Cruelty has consequences, power is never absolute, and sometimes the powerless find their power. In 1863, during the Civil War, Union troops occupied the land where Cypress Grove once stood. They found traces of old tunnels beneath the property, bones in nearby swamps, tree markings hinting at ritual sites. But the war moved on, and no one investigated further. In 1971, demolition work uncovered a journal sealed within a wall detailing names, dates, rituals, victims. As Catherine had foreseen, it was coded. Before it could be fully deciphered, the journal vanished from county records. Some say it was destroyed. Others claim it was taken by descendants of the Brethren to protect their ancestors' secrets. A few believe it still exists, waiting to be rediscovered when the time is right. What is certain? 13 prominent men died in a fire in 1841. Catherine Rutledge disappeared soon after, with no confirmed body found. An enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross was reported sold to a plantation in Alabama, but no record exists. For years afterward, stories spread among enslaved communities of a network helping fugitives escape, led by a man who faced the monster and prevailed. Whether those stories were truth or wishful thinking, no one can say. Yet sometimes truth lives not in official records, but in the stories told, in the memories kept, in the justice remembered, even when history tries to erase it. This mystery shows that power built on cruelty is never as unshakable as it appears, that secrets kept in darkness will eventually see the light, and that the powerless can hold the greatest power of all, the power to witness, to remember, to refuse forgetting. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything has been revealed? Do you think that journal still exists, waiting to be found? Leave your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more dark historical mysteries, subscribe to Slave's Thought. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story, and share this video with someone who loves mysteries that blur history and horror. These stories must be remembered. These voices must be heard. See you in the next video.